She spotted the boy alone in the diner, shoulders shaking, eyes drowning in silent tears, while everyone else looked away. She sat down without thinking, not knowing her small act of kindness would shatter everything she believed about her life. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The bell above the door jingled weakly as another customer stumbled into Daisy's diner. The place always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and overworked fryer oil, but to Brooke Williams, it smelled like survival. She shifted the weight of a heavy tray onto her hip, weaving between cracked vinyl booths and sticky tables, her sneakers sticking slightly with every hurried step. Her uniform, a faded pink waitress dress 2 sizes too big, clung to her damp skin. The air conditioning was broken again, and the afternoon sun baked the diner through grimy windows. Brooke didn't have the luxury of complaining. Not today. Not ever. She needed every tip, every quarter dropped into her jar just to stay ahead of rent, groceries, and the gas bill hanging over her like a guillotine. At table 7, a group of businessmen in pressed shirts snapped their fingers impatiently. At table 3, a young mother scowled and checked her watch. At the counter, a regular grumbled about his eggs being overdone. Brooke moved faster, smiling even when her cheeks burned. As she maneuvered toward the back, balancing plates piled high with burgers and soggy fries, she caught sight of him, a little boy sitting alone in a corner booth, maybe 7, maybe 8 years old, dark brown hair, too long and messy, clinging to his forehead in sweaty strands. A milkshake sat untouched in front of him, the whipped cream collapsing into a sad swirl. And the boy, he wasn't eating, wasn't drinking, wasn't even playing with a phone or toy. He just sat there, small and still, his tiny shoulders quivering in silent sobs. Brooke slowed, glancing at the clock. Her shift was at peak chaos. The diner was packed. The kitchen was 15 tickets behind. Customers would yell. Tips would vanish. She hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then she dumped the tray on a nearby side table, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over. "Hey there, buddy," she said, kneeling carefully beside the booth, keeping her voice low and warm. "You okay?" The boy flinched, pulling away slightly, his head ducking lower. Tears streaked his flushed cheeks, his bottom lip trembling. Brooke's heart twisted painfully. She knew that look. Loneliness so big it drowned you before you could even scream for help. She didn't push. She didn't flood him with questions or fake smiles. Instead, she pulled a napkin from her pocket, folded it neatly, and slid it across the table like a peace offering. "It's all right. You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she said. "I'll just sit here for a minute if that's okay." The boy sniffled but didn't answer. Brooke slid onto the seat across from him anyway, tucking one leg under herself. She didn't look directly at him, just stared out the window, pretending to watch the cars crawl by. Minutes passed. The diner's noise buzzed around them, forks clattering, orders shouted, the distant sizzle of grease. But in the little bubble of that booth, there was only quiet. Slowly, out of the corner of her eye, Brooke saw the boy peek up at her. His eyes, dark brown, too big for his face, were raw with fear and something even worse, hopelessness. Brooke smiled, small and real. "You want another milkshake?" she asked gently. "Or maybe some fries?" "On me." The boy blinked, confused. Then, hesitantly, he shook his head no. But when his hand crept forward to clutch the napkin she'd given him, Brooke felt something shift. A thread of trust, delicate as spider silk, stretched between them. She stayed. Even as customers at the counter started waving angrily for their checks. Even as her manager shot her a furious glare from the kitchen door. Brooke stayed, anchored by a simple truth. No tip was more important than a scared little boy sitting alone. Not today, not ever. The jangle of the diner's front doorbell snapped Brooke's attention up. A man burst through. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of urgency that made people instinctively step aside. His clothes were casual, a worn black jacket, dark jeans, running shoes, but they couldn't hide the sharpness in his posture, the tension in the line of his jaw. His gray-blue eyes scanned the diner in a single surgical sweep. Then he spotted the boy. "Jake!" His voice cracked with panic. The little boy, Jake, twisted around, recognition sparking like a match. His face lit up, raw joy wiping away the sadness clinging to him. He slid off the booth seat and sprinted into the man's arms. Brooke stood too quickly, bumping her hip into the table. She took a step back, trying to fade away. The man knelt, cradling the boy tightly against his chest, murmuring words Brooke couldn't hear. Jake buried his face in the man's jacket, his small fists clutching the fabric like he was afraid to ever let go again. Brooke felt something sting behind her eyes. She turned, ready to slip back into the kitchen before she made a scene. "Wait!" The man's voice stopped her. Brooke turned reluctantly. The man stood, one hand still resting protectively on Jake's back, the other gripping the edge of the booth. His gaze met hers, steady, piercing, grateful. "You stayed with him," he said, voice low but firm. Brooke shrugged, suddenly self-conscious under the weight of his stare. "He looked scared," she said simply. "I couldn't just leave him." The man's face softened. Not much, just enough to show a fracture in his armor. "Most people would have," he said. Brooke shook her head, feeling heat creep up her neck. "I'm not most people," she murmured. The man studied her for another heartbeat, something evaluating, measuring. Then he shifted Jake slightly in his arms and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a business card and crossed the distance between them. "Thank you," he said, pressing the card into her hand. "Please, call me tomorrow. I owe you." Before Brooke could protest, he turned and walked away, Jake still clinging tightly to him. The diner's bell jingled again. The door swung shut behind them. The world rushed back in, clattering dishes, shouted orders, the sizzle of the grill. Brooke stared at the card in her hand. It was heavy, real paper, expensive and smooth under her fingers. Embossed letters glinted under the cheap fluorescent lights. Nathan Grayson. Grayson Holdings. Her breath caught. Nathan Grayson. She knew that name. Everyone did. CEO of one of the biggest private investment empires in the country. Billionaire. Titan of business. A man who usually appeared in glossy magazines or behind podiums at financial summits, not in greasy diners chasing after little boys. Brooke sank into the booth Jake had left, the card trembling slightly between her fingers. She thought back to the moment she saw Jake, sitting alone with tears slipping down his cheeks. She hadn't asked who he was. She hadn't cared. He was just a scared kid who needed someone. And now the father she'd comforted him for wasn't just anyone. He was Nathan Grayson. And Brooke's life, though she didn't know it yet, was about to change forever. Brooke spent the entire night tossing in her narrow bed, the business card burning a hole on her nightstand. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jake's tear-streaked face, the desperate way he had clung to Nathan Grayson's jacket. Every time she opened her eyes, she stared at the card again, wondering if she'd dreamed it all. By morning, the fear gnawed at her worse than the exhaustion. What if it was a mistake? What if calling him made her look desperate or greedy or foolish? Maybe she should just throw the card away and forget it ever happened. But something deep inside, something stronger than fear, pushed her forward. By noon, she stood in front of the towering glass building downtown, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her only decent jacket. The Grayson Holdings logo gleamed above the revolving doors like a challenge. Brooke swallowed hard and pushed through. The lobby was a sea of marble and glass, polished so bright she could see her reflection. Messy, blonde hair tucked behind her ears, faded jeans, scuffed sneakers. She looked painfully out of place. The receptionist barely blinked when Brooke showed the card. "You're expected," she said crisply, and pointed Brooke toward a private elevator. The ride up was silent, except for the hum of the machinery and Brooke's own hammering heart. When the elevator doors opened, Nathan Grayson was already waiting. He didn't sit behind a desk like she expected. He stood by the window, hands casually tucked into his pockets, watching the city stretch out beneath him. When he turned, he smiled. Not a corporate smile, not a politician's smile, but something almost human. "Miss Williams," he said, stepping forward to shake her hand. Brooke's palms were clammy. She hoped he didn't notice. You didn't have to invite me here," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't have to," Nathan agreed. "I wanted to." He gestured for her to sit. Brooke perched nervously on the edge of a leather chair. Nathan remained standing, his presence filling the room without effort. "Jake's been through a lot," he said simply. "He lost his mother last year. He doesn't trust easily. But yesterday, you didn't treat him like a problem. You didn't pity him. You just stayed." Brooke fidgeted with the frayed hem of her jacket, unsure what to say. Nathan continued, his voice steady but sincere. "Most people who find themselves near my family, they see a payday. You saw a scared little boy." He crossed to the desk, picked up a folder, and brought it back to her. "Inside is a full scholarship offer, tuition, housing, expenses, covered, anywhere you want to go." Brooke's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. "And," Nathan added, "an offer to work here, at Grayson Holdings, as my personal assistant. Part-time, flexible hours while you study. Starting salary more than double what you're making at the diner." Brooke's throat tightened. "But why me? I'm just—" She stumbled, the words bitter on her tongue. "I'm just a waitress." Nathan's gaze hardened, but not at her, at the very idea of it. "You're not just anything," he said quietly. "You're exactly the kind of person I want in my company. Someone who does the right thing when no one's watching." Tears threatened, but Brooke blinked them back fiercely. She had spent so long thinking she was invisible, replaceable, forgettable. And here stood a man who saw her, really saw her. Nathan smiled slightly, sensing her hesitation. "Take the night to think it over," he said. "But know this. This isn't charity. This is opportunity. One you earned the moment you chose to be kind without expecting anything in return." Brooke clutched the folder to her chest as she left. For the first time in years, the world outside didn't feel so heavy. The city lights seemed brighter. The possibilities, real. She had been given a door to a new life. All she had to do now was walk through it. The next morning, Brooke stood in front of the diner. Her reflection stared back at her from the smudged glass. Same messy blonde hair, same tired eyes. But there was something new, too. A quiet fire. She wore the nicest outfit she could find. A fitted navy blazer from a thrift store, a simple white blouse, black flats. No apron. No stain-faded uniform. Today was different. She stepped inside Daisy's for the last time. The greasy air, the sticky floors, the crackling speaker playing old country songs. All of it hit her like a ghost from a life she was already leaving behind. "Brooke, Table 9's asking for extra ranch," one of the waitresses shouted from behind the counter without looking up. Brooke smiled sadly. Not my problem anymore. She walked to the kitchen, her steps sure and steady. Her manager, a heavy-set man with a coffee-stained shirt, spotted her and scowled. "You're late," he barked. "Clock in already."
Brooke shook her head. "I'm not staying," she said, voice firm. "This was my last shift. I left a note with the schedule." The manager blinked, caught off guard. "You quitting? Now?" Brooke nodded, not bothering to explain. How could she? How could she put into words the weight lifting off her chest, the future opening wide in front of her? She dropped her name tag onto the counter, turned, and walked out without waiting for a response. Outside, the city felt different. The same cracked sidewalks, the same flickering street lamps, but they weren't cages anymore. They were stepping stones. At the bus stop, Brooke clutched the acceptance letters in her bag. Bright, clean papers promising a future she had never dared hope for. Business school, full scholarship, a real career. At Grayson Holdings, her new job waited. Her ID badge already printed, a desk, a computer, a salary big enough to make past due bills a thing of the past. And more than that, a little boy who ran into her arms whenever he visited the office. Jake, with his lopsided grin and drawings folded messily into his backpack. Brooke hadn't just gained a career. She had gained a second family. Nathan Grayson treated her with a quiet, steady respect, never once making her feel small or out of place. He introduced her to clients as the woman who saved my son. He listened to her ideas. He asked for her opinions. He believed in her. The bus rumbled down the street. Brooke stepped on, dropping coins into the slot, and took a seat by the window. The sun gleamed off the buildings as they sped past, not cold glass prisons anymore, but towers full of promise. Brooke rested her forehead against the window, letting the warmth soak in. She thought of the boy sitting alone in the diner booth, of the greasy uniform, of the cracked tile floors she used to mop until her hands ached. And she smiled, not because she was leaving all that behind, but because she had survived it, because she had chosen to stay, to care, to believe, even when it cost her. And that small choice, invisible to the world, had rewritten her entire future. The diner hadn't made her. It had tested her, and she had passed. Brooke Williams, waitress, survivor, dreamer, was finally stepping into the life she had always deserved. And this time, she wasn't looking back.